I'm gonna give you 5 mixing tips today that have nothing to do with EQ or compression or a plugin, but all of them will automatically lead to getting better mixes without learning any new techniques at all. In fact, sometimes learning more and more techniques is what's hurting your mixes because you're constantly stuck in information overload. Make it easy to do the right thing. This is a quote I heard recently and I couldn't figure out who initially said it, but it definitely captures the theme of what I'm about to tell you. So tip number 1 is to mix on a consumer device. Now notice I didn't say go check your mix on something. I'm talking about actually mixing on something other than studio monitors. Back in the day, I used to rely a lot on the car test. So like everyone else, I'd finish my mix in the studio, bring it out into the car, and I could instantly hear all the problems with it. I used to sit there wishing that I could just run a super long cable and have a remote control and just mix in my car because I knew it so well. That's where I listened to music the most. Well, now for me, it's AirPods. I mostly listen to music on these things for enjoyment. And I recently started incorporating them into my actual mixing workflow to the point where the last mix I did, I probably spent about 30 to 40% of the time just mixing on these. And I think it's my best mix yet. And it was so easy to hear the problems and fix them, especially when comparing to other reference tracks. Now, the key thing here is that it's gotta be something that you are very familiar with. So it's not about just going and buying any old cheap speaker and mixing on that. Identify what do you listen to music on the most for enjoyment, and then try to find ways to incorporate that into your mixing process. And I'm not saying spend 100% of your mix listening on whatever that is, but work it into the process, spend some time on it because you're just gonna make very different decisions and they'll often be for the best and for the excitement and translation of your mix. All right, next tip, you wanna train yourself to commit so that you can't go back later. And this applies to tracking as well as mixing. So for tracking, that means avoiding multi-miking everything, avoid capturing backup tones, avoid planning to redo or reamp things later, and definitely avoid having to pick the takes later on. For me, if I'm recording vocals, I will leave that vocal session with the entire lead vocal track already decided and committed, and I don't keep any backup takes. For mixing, think about your drum samples, amp sim tones, any virtual instruments. You wanna stay virtual only during tracking and production. And when it's time to mix, you wanna commit to those sounds and print them down and then hide the source track. Why do I say this? Well, your decisions build on each other. So if you're mixing and you start with the drums and you choose some good drum sounds, you've layered in the samples, and then you carry on, you're working on your bass, your guitar, and vocals, and then later on you start to second guess, and then you go back and completely change out the drum samples, well, now you're kind of fighting against and undoing all those other decisions you made based on what you were hearing with the original drums. But we also have limited energy to make decisions. So that decision you made about the drums 4 hours ago is probably a better decision than the one you're making later on when your ears are getting tired and you're freaking out and starting to second guess and question everything that you did in the mix. You need to have momentum in the mix. So reduce your options and try not to go backwards and have to revisit and make the same decision 5 times. Tip number 3 is to set a deadline with real accountability. And the best way to stop overthinking and second guessing your mix and taking forever on it is having a hard deadline. Now here's the thing, that deadline is gonna be impossible to keep if you're the only one who knows about it, because there's no consequences. So something I practice is making myself accountable to the client in advance. So right on my invoice, in the agreement with the client, I say, I'm gonna start mixing on this day, and I'm gonna send you my mix no later than this day. And I even do this in other ways with live streams or online trainings. Many times in the past, I've announced an online course that I'm gonna create and set a release date, announced it, even had an early bird sign up, and then I'll start creating it. So find ways to really put yourself on the line, give yourself a real reason to commit and to focus, and it will bring out the best in you. Tip number 4 is to use plugins with less visual feedback. So listen to this, it's from a science website, so it must be true. We recognized approximately 80% of all impressions through our eyes. Humans tend to rely more on sight for information about their environment versus hearing or smell. So that means whatever you're seeing on the screen will impact the decisions you make about what you hear. There's no way around it. And that's why I almost never use plugins with these big frequency spectrum displays. I don't want to make decisions based on what I'm seeing. And I'm going to show you a little experiment here just to give you an idea of how much this is probably affecting you without you really realizing it. So, we all know how kind of small and silly a guitar DI track sounds like, right? But throw some pedals on there, and an amp, some distortion, some gain, and all of a sudden, we got this. Now imagine what's happening behind the scenes to that tiny little DI sound, right? That's some pretty extreme processing. So we're totally comfortable taking this guitar DI and mangling it into something completely different. And yet at the same time, when it comes to doing a big EQ boost or using a lot of compression or saturation or distortion in the mix, we get scared and we think that we're doing too much. Yes, sometimes a visual tool is helpful, but most often it's a handicap. I mean, you wouldn't try to judge a painting with your ears. It doesn't make any sense. So try using plugins that don't have these big frequency displays and lean towards plugins that are simple, that don't have 100 different controls and a million buttons and knobs and things for you to fiddle with. You'll just make easier, better decisions. All right, that brings me nicely into my final tip, which is to ruthlessly cut out all other distractions. So if you're sitting there checking Instagram every 10 minutes while you're mixing, you are operating far below your potential. And research has said that it can take up to 25 minutes to get your brain back into the state it was in before you switched your attention to something else, and that the more we switch tasks, the worse we get at everything. But this is how most people live their lives, right? They can't focus continuously on anything without getting that itch to pull out their phone and look at it. And trust me, I'm not a superhero. I battle this too, but I do see it as an actual battle that I'm trying to fight. Some of the things that have helped me, number one, I always have my computer in do not disturb mode so I don't get any notifications. I never check anything internet related first thing in the morning, especially not emails or messages. I've got feed blockers installed on my Mac so that even if I do go to Facebook or Instagram, I can't even use it. And I also got a little bit extreme with my phone lately. I made it completely black and white, deleted almost all the apps. I don't even have the mail app on this, so that now when I do get that itch to pick up the phone, I unlock it and there's nothing to do. So I put it down and carry on. But to mix at a high level, you have to be able to do deep work. And ask yourself, can you sit and continuously focus on something for a few hours at a time without having to go and check your email or send a text message or go and watch content? And if the honest answer is no, then I seriously recommend working on this area. And I believe that that ability to truly focus deeply on something is a really valuable and rare skill these days that's going to differentiate successful from unsuccessful people even more so going forward. On the surface, these might not seem as exciting as a hot new plugin tip, but trust me, all of these will actually make you a better mixer, a faster mixer, and honestly make the process more enjoyable too. So start training yourself with these good habits. And on the flip side, check out this video for 17 mixing mistakes that you definitely don't want to make a habit of. All right, talk to you later.